Hello everyone. Let us get started with C++ certification training. So we are going to look at coding style, principles of clean coding. Now the topics that we are going to cover are what is clean code and how to write clean code. So first of all, what is a clean code? So let us look at some of the famous definitions of clean code. So every programmer has a personal take on the definition of clean code. Let us have a look at how some of the most renowned and highly experienced programmer has defined the clean code. So John Strostrup, the inventor of C++, says, I like my code to be elegant and efficient. The logic should be straightforward to make it hard for bugs to hide. The dependencies minimal to ease maintenance, error handling complete according to an articulated strategy, and performance close to optimal so as not to tempt people to make the code messy with unprincipled optimization. Clean code does one thing well. So that is a definition of clean code by John Strostrup, the inventor of C++. Then let us look at another definition by Grady Booch, the author of Object-Oriented Analysis and Design with Applications. Clean code is simple and direct. Clean code reads like well-written prose. Clean code never obscures the designer's intent, but rather is full of crisp abstraction and straightforward lines of control. So these are some definitions from well-known programmers. And of course, different people can have their different take on the concept of what is a clean code. Now, what are some of the benefits of clean code? Clean code benefits is that it makes use of proper indentation, making the code easy to read and understand. So if you indent your code well for different lines and statements that you write, it is easy to read the code. The execution is fairly quick. Then it follows naming convention and makes use of some meaningful names. I'll explain about this in more details in next slide, but it is very useful to make use of some good naming conventions, and clean code is also well tested. So these are some of the benefits, or rather uh, clean code principles if you want to call it. Then what is a bad code? It makes no use of indentation, making the code look cluttered and confusing. It takes a lot of time to execute since you have not written the code properly. It makes use of complex names and it is poorly tested. So how to write clean code? Let us look at some examples. Before that, what is a naming convention? Naming convention is a general scheme used for naming variables, functions, classes, objects, and other entities in a source code, right? Using naming convention helps in minimizing the effort required to read and understand the source code. So basically, when you are creating a variable or a class, or for that matter function, or whatever it is in the code that you are writing, it's a good idea to have a good naming convention. Some important points to remember are: use meaningful names while having, or rather while naming variable, functions, classes, object, whatever you are using in your program or code. The name must reveal the reason behind the existence of the respective entity. So a dirty code can look like this: int d, that is the duration in days, maybe you want to mean double bal for the total balance, and function it simply could be func, func. But if you write a clean code, this is how it should look like: int with a proper name, duration in days, double with stating it is the total balance, right? And when you're trying to display a message, we'll call the function as print message. So this is a good naming convention under the concept of making use of clean code. So there are a few naming conventions available and used very widely in the industry. One is camel case notation using variable and function name, and the snake case notation for classes, right? So in camel case, what happens is the camel case combines multiple words by removing the space and capitalize the first letter of all the words excluding the first. So if you will see here, this is one very famous naming convention used. So camel case is this is combination of three letters: customer, login, and account, right? So the first alphabet of this word is lowercase and the rest of the words is uppercase, so that it improves the readability, right? This is a camel case. Then we have snake case. Snake case combines multiple words by replacing each space with an underscore. So if you had two words, for example, customer, login, account, so they are separated by underscore here, and capitalizing the first letter only of the first letter, right? So you capitalize the first letter of only the first word here, right? So you might call it as a first alphabet also. So this is how we make use of camel case and snake case. So either one of them is acceptable in industry, and they are used predominantly all over the programming industry. So then how do we write functions using the principle of clean coding? So important point to remember about functions are use separate functions for separate operations to make debugging easier. Meaning that if you are performing operation 1, operation 2, operation 3, you don't want to clutter all those operations under a single function, right? You can segregate them in individual functions so that when you are debugging the code while fixing issues, it is easy. It allows debuggers to skip the function which might not be of their interest and reduce the effort and time required in spotting the bug. So when you are debugging, and if you think you don't want to go inside the details and implementation of that function, you can skip that function. Skipping means you don't have to debug step by step. That is meant by skipping. So it's always a good idea to modularize or break down the complex problem into simple, small functions. Then keep the function short and easy to understand. Limit the number of arguments to less than or equal to 3. So this is not a guideline or a principle, but a good idea is to have the minimum number of arguments, as many as less as possible, to avoid a lot of confusion when a lot of arguments are getting passed. Then function name must be descriptive such that it must explain the purpose being served by the function. So for example, this is a function with two arguments that is being passed to it, right? And this is the function which gets balance, right? So we are naming it as get account balance. So then what about comments? Comments are used to explain the code and keep notes for future use. Using comments is a good practice, but one must be careful of not using self-explanatory or bad comments and avoid cluttering. So basically, when you are writing a comment should be in such a way that it describes a functionality not only to the person who is writing the code, but also to the end user or some other person in the team as well. And there should be not too much of cluttering or extensive comment as well. So we want to be precise and to the point with help of comments. So what are some of good comments guidelines and bad comment guidelines? It must provide useful information about the code. It explains the purpose being served by a given block of code. It can also be used for warning other programmer about certain consequences. I mean, if you feel that a certain piece of code is critical and making changes with respect to the logic or functionality might break some part of your code, you can provide some kind of warning to any other programmer who might work on that code. Then what about bad comment? It fails to provide useful information about the code. It misleads the programmer by providing inaccurate information, and such comments itself require explanation and cause unnecessary cluttering. So basically, you have to be very clear and to the point while writing the comments and not clutter the code when you are trying to explain a particular piece of code with comments. So then next is formatting. What is formatting? Formatting basically increases the readability of the code and makes it maintainable for the future. So we make use of indentation, proper vertical spacing and horizontal spacing. So using proper indentation is extremely critical when the program is composed of multiple functions, loops, nested loops. In such situation, it is very tricky to read or understand the code if it is not well indented. So basically, you will get in a situation when you work on real application, the code is going to get very big, very huge. So, and there can be nested loop, inside loop, inside loop. So you have to make sure that you do proper indentation so that it improves the readability of the code for somebody who is going to maybe work on your piece of code, or in fact for yourself as well when you come back and revisit the code later on. Then there should be vertical spacing. Each concept must be separated from the other using some good amount of space must be there from between maybe two lines or two statements. And there should be proper horizontal spacing, which is white space are used in between entities that are weakly associated, and spaces are eliminated when entities are strongly related. So these are just some principles of how you format your code in a way so that it improves the readability and maintainability over a period of time. Then some other important points which are worth remembering is that you should do regular testing. What why we should regular why we should do regular testing is because regular testing helps in keeping the clean code, or rather keeping your code clean. Then you should also refrain from using large arrays as it reduces the readability of the code. Then use functions to avoid writing the same code again and again. I mean, if you have a piece of code which performs the same operation, it's better to move it out into a separate function. And then error handling is key to making the clean code robust and thus increasing the maintainability. So, I mean, as a good programmer, you should also take care of handling your error gracefully and displaying the appropriate message so that when there is a problem, it is easier to debug the problem and resolve the problem. So to summarize our discussion regarding clean code, at the end of this session, you should be able to understand what is clean code and then understand the various ways to basically write clean code. So the summary of our discussion is that we have seen the benefits of clean code. We have seen naming conventions. We have seen how to write good comments and how to do proper formatting. So that's all we have in this discussion. Thank you so much for your time.